Thank you, Zenon. Can you hear me? Raise your hand at the back. Is the sound fine? Thank you. Super. It's great to be here. I want to talk about continuous stewardship, effective humane services enriched by software. My focus these days is on holistic innovation across the organization. I'm the originator of the Adapt Together approach from Conflux, which you'll find out about later in the workshop, and also, of course, the co-author of the book Team Topologies. I've ended up running 2 separate companies. Don't do it, it's really hard, but that's where it is. There's a story about a different kind of fracture plane, which we didn't talk about in the Team Topologies book. Ignore that. So it's now 5 years, almost to the day. September the 19th, 2019 was when the book was published, Team Topologies book was published. And it's been a bit of a journey for me. I didn't expect to become an entrepreneur, didn't expect to be running these businesses, didn't expect to the enthusiasm that we can see today in the conference here, which is amazing. I absolutely love it. We are in Team Topologies moving towards an entrepreneurial ecosystem, but with a non-profit core that aligns with the kind of the ethos of the conference today. So it's like, technically speaking, I own one of the companies in the Team Topologies ecosystem, but we're moving that towards a non-profit status. So it's not about me taking dividends out. It's not me personally profiting from all of this kind of enthusiasm and practitioner wisdom and so on and so on. But that doesn't mean it's free. Like, people still need to pay for this stuff, right? But the core of it is moving in a non-profit direction, which is very important to me. I've spent some time, particularly over the last year, really trying to connect with what's really, really important to me. That's one of the things that are important to me, is that this activity and enthusiasm and experience and movement around Team Topologies has at its heart a non-profit thing, but still allows other organizations and initiatives to flourish. Okay, here's a question. This is the question I'm going to try and answer today. How can we promote effective ongoing evolution of software-enriched services on which humans increasingly depend? Let's look at a quick history of software, or a particular history. This is not the history, this is a history. It's a story of software, starting with the Lions Coffee House. Who knows what the Lions Coffee House has in relation to software? Hand here. One of the foundations for the mainframe. So yeah, your computing career started in a coffee house. Was it London or New York? Anyway, one of these places. And they were running their payroll on a very early version of a computer. And then there was some code breaking in Bletchley Park. This history is very UK-centric, but I'm from the UK, so it's fine. This, in the World War II, did some code breaking at Bletchley Park. You'll actually see that the history of computing is also the history of women being involved, and then kind of pushed out in the 1990s and 2000s, and now, thankfully, we're trying, well, activity is trying, like this conference today, to trying to restore the balance. IBM System 360 mainframe in the 60s, super successful. But these things so far are all targeted on a very narrow slice of stuff. We're trying to process payroll, or we're trying to crack codes at Bletchley Park, or here we're trying to kind of automate some really core like banking functions or some calculations. Still quite niche. That's what a computer is for, solving calculations, or for doing calculations and solving hard equations. And we got like a 90s office with a PC and Windows, and it's again, the computer's there to we'll instead of typing it out on a typewriter, we'll do it on a computer, and then we can save it. And it's still got quite a narrow role. It's slightly broader, but it's still quite narrow. So it's a business operation. Did you know, by the way, that in the 1990s it was really cool to do a selfie? It wasn't called a selfie then, but effectively a selfie with your PC. The Spice Girls. I had no idea, but there's an entire thread on Reddit that talks about this. If you're really interested, go and have a look. I went down a rabbit hole. This is the result of going down that rabbit hole. So yeah, PCs were cool. Big, horrible, hulking monsters that they were. And now, of course, we're in the brilliant world of fast fashion and influencer grift with things like Temu. And this is what it's for. It's about selling stuff and, making a quick buck. And so on. And then there's a load of stuff in between. But let's have a look at the reality of modern software services in 2024. Your production environment, or where your code is deployed, might be like 13,000 advertising screens with some facial recognition and micro-targeting for adverts. It might be 56,000 home robot vacuum cleaners. There's someone in the room who knows quite a lot about home robot vacuum cleaners. It might be 1 million sensors across 100 workplaces. It might be 650 smart fabric suits for firefighters to help detect when the suit is about to fail, and so then we can pull them out before they actually get burned. It might be pension payments, making sure that actually we've got the cash flow into that household so they continue to pay their bills and so on. Or it might also be winter fuel payments to someone who's actually quite vulnerable. And if that payment doesn't come through, that person can literally freeze to death. And this has happened in reality, sadly in the UK, but other places too. Maybe the software is deployed onto 2,000 tractors. And what happens when a solar storm hits, and it knocks out the GPS and those tractors refuse to move? We can't cut the crops. That harvest from that year is significantly under what we're expecting. There's a knock-on effect on food prices. Some people starve. This is literally happening. Crop sensors sending data back to some data collector around the quality of the soil and the irrigation and so on, again, to help with food production. Or maybe we've got a big vertical farm harvesting crops. And if that fails, again, has a knock-on effect on food prices. People go hungry, possibly, or eventually some of those people might end up, might contribute to some kind of starvation. What about if you've got 14,000 digital insulin pumps as part of your production estate? One's if the software you're working, the software that it uses, has some kind of security flaw, someone hacks it. How many of those 14,000 users of those insulin pumps are actually going to die because you couldn't be bothered to update your patching processes properly, or have the right attention to detail around quality? There have been incidences where things like cyber attacks on hospitals, where the hospital is effectively shut down, operations cancelled, or hospital procedures not being followed through, leaving people in a state of pain or in a state of substandard care. There's also incidents of using AI systems for cancer screening. There's a research paper linked in the slides here, you'll get them later, where this was for breast cancer, and unfortunately the AI system was significantly underperforming, but because of automation bias, the performance of the human professionals involved dropped because of the automation bias. They assumed that the computer was right, and so actually, although normally they would have been able to spot the cancer, they decided to ignore it. We've got some significant problems here that are increasingly life-altering and life-threatening. We've now got a situation where Salesforce launched their autonomous AI platform called Agentforce, I think, and that involves GenAI writing and deploying software autonomously. So this is happening today, or it's about to happen. This is what's being pitched. So it's time to realize that modern software-enriched services have increasingly life-altering effects on humans. It's not just about payroll for a tea shop. It's not just about number crunching in a big IBM 360 mainframe. It's about life-altering effects now. And this has been creeping up, right, over time. And yet, from my perspective, I can't really see comprehensive kind of approaches that actually acknowledge this. We're still pretending that software is just kind of a little tool that's over here, and it kind of does some number crunching. If we continue to take that approach where it's just a bit of software kind of doing some stuff off to the side, there's a real danger that we're sleepwalking into some very, very awkward situations. And there's two different kinds of sleepwalking, at least, that I want to look at, talk through. The first one is this idea of it being done. Sarah Wells mentioned it this morning about software basically is never done. But basically countless organizations still have this done mindset. When's it done? Some things are done. Like there's that migration that Sarah mentioned where we've moved off the old thing, we've moved on to the new thing, and then we decommission the old thing. Fine. There's a sense in which that is done, but the overall service is still being provided. Done. That little migration is just an internal detail of the ongoing service around the capability. And there's a second problem, which is the idea of generating code faster. And this is what a lot of people now starting to use AI for. And what I can see, what you can see if you have a little look into this space, is businesses are rushing to use GenAI to write loads of software, millions of lines of code, and basically just ignoring decades of proven practices in software engineering. And there's lots of reasons for that, but this is what's happening. They're ignoring things about coupling, ignoring things about technical debt, and ignoring things about operational effectiveness, and so on and so on. And these are two major problems. So I think it's worth being realistic and acknowledging that the failure modes of modern software can be life-ruining. They might ruin our life. We've lost all our money because the GenAI generated banking application, basically just dumped all the money somewhere into a who knows, into a black hole, effectively. But actually, they can be life-threatening too, particularly on the medical side. But even just a bank transfer that puts money into our account so that it can pay for the winter fuel payment to keep our house, to keep the pensioner's house warm. If that doesn't go in, at one level it's, it's just a bank transfer, how's it going to affect them? It can literally be life-threatening for that person. So we need a holistic approach to evolving software-enriched services that fits the increasingly life-altering effects on humans. This is what I believe. Let's have a look at this problem mindset, this done mindset. On time, on scope, on budget. Never going to happen. Once this XY project is done, people are obsessed let's get this thing done. People talk about a software factory, which is a hugely dangerous mindset. We're just putting stuff in the top, turning a handle, and out come sausages. Let's just get this over the line. Let's not worry about the details. Let's just get it over the line. And people obviously are incentivized to do these things. What about this one? We can swarm on tasks that need to be done. Sounds appealing? And in some contexts, it's kind of fine. But there's a danger that we'll look at in a second. What about this one? Give developers some variety in the work. This is a pernicious perspective. A pool of fungible results. I don't know about you, but the word fungible always to me reminds me of mushrooms. It's weird, I don't know. People talk about a pool of fungible resources when they mean people. And there's some significant problems with this done aspect or the way of thinking about capabilities when building these software systems. On time and scope and on budget, there's no expectation of learning about what we're doing. If you remember what Sarah said this morning, they decided to can that project, and all it was a bit disappointing, but actually they learned a huge amount, which allowed them later on to do things in parallel, asynchronously. So they learned a lot, and that's a great example of a learning environment inside an organization. There was actually a realization they needed to learn, they could learn. But in lots of places, if we're just focused on time, on scope, on budget, there's no expectation of learning and no expectation that we're going to discover new things. That's a significant problem. When the technology is changing so quickly, we need to be always learning and innovating. That's why I've got this on my T-shirt. Everyone needs a mindset. We need people, everyone in the organization with the mindset of, I need to be innovating somehow. Innovating in process, in technology, in the ways of working, whatever. So once the XY project is done, it ignores a whole set of things that do need to continue. It's optimizing for that just one little aspect without thinking about the continuity. The software factory mindset is super mechanistic. It just assumes it's it actually assumes typically it has a mindset of a 1960s or 70s factory, because modern factories are actually not just like a sausage machine. Modern factories are actually much more adaptive, slightly strangely. Toyota's got a programmable factory floor now without all of the big kind of, what do you call them? without all the big assembly lines. It's actually much more configurable. So people's mental model is even out of sync with what the reality is like in factories. Anyway, let's just get it over the line. Is increasing rework later. It damages the viability. We can swarm on tasks that need to be done. Sometimes that's all right. But crucial domain context is often lost and ignored when we do that kind of just mixing in of a whole lot of responsibilities. Let's give developers some variety in the work. And development is one of the smallest costs in these kind of software services. Tiny, tiny slice. And if we've got this pool of fungible resources, just mix them in and do the work, we're losing awareness of the long-term aspects. How the software needs to evolve. So this is the first problem I think we need to work beyond. Many people still think that the software will be done. We're at problem mindset number 2, this generate code faster with GenAI. Humans are the bottleneck in creating code. Why can't these humans just code faster, type faster? What about GenAI deciding what services to create and deploy? So this is a real thing. This is where the industry is going. We'll get an advantage if we get to market quicker. Could be. We'll just get GenAI to create a new version of this thing if we need to change it. And we'll let the LLM decide what services to provide. I mean, these are really appealing things to lots of businesses. This is what a lot of businesses are actually looking for. But there are 1 or 2 problems in this space. The bottleneck is actually understanding. It's not writing code. GenAI doesn't understand anything. Whatever the GenAI tech bros want you to believe, GenAI doesn't actually understand anything. The bottleneck has never been in like typing or generating the code in the first place. The bottleneck is in understanding and dealing with the difference between this concept and that concept and so on. And that's why things need to take a long time. So GenAI in itself can't understand the business domain. It can maybe write the code the first time round or create some boilerplate, but it needs humans to understand the context in which that thing needs to happen. What organizational intent are we trying to encode by getting the GenAI to write some code around this thing? Like, it needs humans to understand what kind of context we're putting in place, and then put some constraints or prompts to constrain the code generation. Maybe we'll get an advantage if we get to market quicker. Okay, but what's the long-term cost of generating like 100 million lines of unmaintainable code? That might be a significant drag. You might get to market quicker, but you might then have put a huge weight around that organization's neck, effectively, which means it can't even move. Oh, we'll just get GenAI to generate a new version of the code when we need something to change. Well, there's like decades of awareness in the software community around, data migration, backwards compatibility, referential integrity, a whole bunch of these like fairly basic things which are kind of important if we want a bank of balance to remain like accurate and so on and so on and so on. So it's an opportunity. There's actually jobs for everyone in this room for the foreseeable future. GenAI is not going to take your job because if things go down this route, then there'll be like decades worth of like fixing and work for us to sort out. So like I'm kind of upbeat about it, to be totally honest. So humans need to discover and curate the organizational intent. What does the organization want to achieve? You'd be surprised, well, maybe not. I was surprised how many organizations have no real clue what they're trying to achieve. So that's what we need to use human beings for, even if the actual code generation part is sort of being automated. So the danger here is that GenAI is going to generate massive amounts of code, like 10 or 100 times the amount of code that we were able to generate as humans, but it's completely unmaintainable. It gives a tiny burst-in-time short advantage, and then basically absolutely kind of disaster in terms of the weight or the friction around that stuff for the organization. So, here's what I think we need to do. And this is what I've started to do. This is what's important to me. I think we need to start with the premise that services, so software-enriched services, need to evolve for 10, 20, 30 years. Think about your pension. Do you want that to kind of fail after a couple of years? You want it to be there when you're going to retire, which is what? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in the future, we need to be thinking about the evolution of these services from the very beginning. So we need to start with the premise that these services need to evolve for 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years, and then work backwards to the needed practices. I don't think this has been like an assumption in kind of software. In some circles, yes, but like in terms of how businesses see software, then they're not thinking about it in these terms at all. What would we expect to see if we focused on continuity of care for software-enriched services? And this is what I think we'd expect to see. We'd expect to see a focus on stewardship and curation. Stewardship in the sense of we're looking after it for the people who come after us. We don't own it. For example, you can own a tumble-down, disheveled, ramshackle house that you rent out to someone else and extract all the money. Like, that's ownership in one level, but you're not looking after the house. You're not fixing the windows, the door's broken, the roof's leaking. Like, stewardship is actually looking after this stuff on an ongoing basis. We'd expect to see long-lived autonomous teams with ongoing context of what they're doing, because the ongoing context is how it helps them to make good decisions for that service as it evolves. We should design for team cognitive or mental load. Now, clearly, these first three things I've talked about are there in the Team Topologies book, if you've read it. We need to expect to continuously untangle business concepts, because if the business concepts are tangled, then the software that gets produced will be tangled. Whether it's human produced or whether it's GenAI produced, it will be tangled if we've not got the concepts separated. We need approaches to funding that encourage stewardship. So funding that's not just like project-based and time-sliced, but actually that's aligned to the flow of value. And some organizations are adopting these kind of ways of working. How about this one? Supplier contracts that align to stewardship. So when I worked in UK government, for example, like in loads of places, the supplier contracts typically get chunked up in terms of different phases of delivery. So like one supplier builds something, then another one deploys it, and another supplier does the run, like the traditional kind of build, test, deploy, run thing. The problem with that is it doesn't align to long-term stewardship. So it's like we need to look at the way that procurement affects flow, working all the way backwards and helping the procurement people to come up with different ways of procuring to enable better stewardship of services. And we need an ongoing realignment around mission and skills and trust and intent. But that needs to be a kind of alignment which is not pushed down from management. There needs to be some kind of bottom-up element or ground-up element too. Perhaps the most important element is that activation of people, networks of people and communities to enable that to emerge, rather than being forced down from the top. We'd expect to see ongoing investment in the health of the code base. And we'd expect to see continuous inspection of the kind of organizational wiring, so things are not getting adrift. We'd expect to see as well service design thinking across the organization, like bringing in awareness of how services are well managed from lots of experience, not necessarily digital service, just services in general. And then we have a digital element to it. So as software-enriched services become ubiquitous and life-altering, I think we need some kind of new mindset. Maybe it's called continuous stewardship. We've had continuous integration, continuous delivery. Maybe it's continuous stewardship, I don't know. Something like this is dealing with all these dimensions to help unlock good decision-making for success in this kind of space. I think Team Topologies has provided a foundation for this, but I think there's some other things needed as well, which I've covered today. The Team Topologies arguably covers these first three around teams and dealing with cognitive load and untangling. And clearly we've got temperature as well, which is the team cognitive load assessment as a service. So if there's a workshop, is there a workshop now in a bit? I should know. Anyway, but come to the stand, the Team Topologies stand, and find out about temperature if you need to do assess team cognitive load at scale. And the Team Topologies core operation and wider network is having some real success with organizations like Flow Health, helping them streamline execution. So go and speak to the people on the Team Topologies stand and find out about what we're doing there, helping organizations to organize for the fast flow of value. My other company, Conflux, is working around like funding for flow, supply contracts for flow, and particularly engagement and alignment for flow through our approach called Adapt Together. And I've got a workshop running at 13:05 today. I think there's still 1 or 2 spaces left, and we'll share some insights there about what that approach looks like. We've worked with, for example, the telecoms company in Canada to help do these kind of things, seek out and champion good practices, and help them innovate better by using these kind of approaches. And we've partnered with CodeScene to help deal with ongoing inspection of Kobe's health. We've got the CTO and founder of CodeScene with us today. And we'll be doing a demo in the afternoon coffee break. CodeScene will be doing a demo in the afternoon coffee break at the Conflux stand. It's an amazing tool. I wish I'd written it myself, which looks at the relationship. It's a socio-technical look at software. It thinks about teams. It helps us think about software in terms of the relationship with teams and flow. So come and have a chat if that's interesting. We've also partnered with Team OS, who are here today. So co-founder Antoine's here today. Stick a hand up. Is that? He's wearing a purple hoodie. Again, Team OS has got this focus on the relationship between like flow and organizations and software to keep things healthy. So come and have a chat. There's a demo in the afternoon coffee break. There may be a new book. Where's Kate? Kate's there. Kate's waving towards the back of the room there. So Kate Tarling, who's the author of The Service Organization, and I are. We've done some plotting. We've done some initial collaboration, some thinking around what this might look like. We're bringing together perspectives from Team Topologies and software delivery and so on from my side, and then Kate's side, kind of the service organization, service management thinking, that kind of stuff. And we'll see what comes out. We're not promising a book, I don't think yet, but we'll see what happens, basically. So come and have a chat if you're interested in this stuff here. So I think this, what I'm calling continuous stewardship, maybe it ends up being called something else. But continuous stewardship, to me, is like a prudent and humane response to the pervasiveness of software in our lives. And I think it feels to me that it's really about time that we actually dealt with this. Stopped ignoring it. GenAI is going to make this all the more important to actually address, because otherwise we'll be drowning in absolute tsunamis of unmaintainable software services. We've got all this stuff already. We've got version control and continuous integration, continuous delivery, agile stuff, DDD, observability, team topology, psychological safety. We've got an ensemble of techniques and practices and things which work really well together if they're focused on this sense of continuous stewardship. So I want to create a pull towards a more humane, effective operating mindset for organizations that are kind of building and running software-enriched services. Get beyond this mindset of it needs to be done, and get beyond this mindset of we just need to generate code faster. So I think the way we do this is these kind of, acknowledge that software is life-changing and life-threatening in some cases, and work backwards from what would it take for us to be in a position where we're evolving this stuff for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I think we've got the practices here already. We know how to do it. Nothing's missing. Bring them together. Make it more of a holistic approach, is what feels important to me. We've got a terrible website online, which is MVP, continuousstewardship.com. You'll find a web form. You can drop your email address in if you're interested. Join the discussion. We'll get something better at some point, but this is like a minimum viable website. And then come and say hi at the Conflux and Team Topologies stands. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. We've got 1 minute maybe for questions. So thank you.
We've got a couple more minutes, so we can have a few questions.
We can have a few questions if you want. Or complaints. Complaints are also fine.
Let's just say thank you to Matthew. We've got a couple of minutes for questions. If anyone has any questions, I'll come here to the front. Thank you.
Can you explain more about the procurement and how that process has to change and how that affects everything else?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question, because that is the best question. That is the best question to ask in this space here. Procurement. So we're doing a lot of work on this with multiple different customers right now, but traditionally you might have had a contract, supplier contract, which said, right, you build this bit of software, but then someone else might have had the contract to do the testing on it. A different supplier had the contract to do like the go-live readiness, and then another supplier had the contract to do like second-line support and first-line support and so on and so on. So you've got a series of contracts which don't line up in terms of the sense of stewardship of that thing. So the first supplier who's just there to develop it has no interest, no natural interest in how it's actually going to run, because they're not thinking about it. They don't have any commercial interest in that thing. So this is particularly applicable to organizations that need to bring in external help to do it. But that means then we've got to kind of somehow upskill procurement. It's almost like you can have an entire day, like an entire conference like this, just focused on like procurement for fast flow, and that would actually be really, really worthwhile. Kind of, for me, a bit boring, but like really important, like really, really unlocking that. Because if the procurement contracts are not lined up in a way which encourages stewardship, there's no amount of team topologies or other kind of techniques that are really going to make much difference. So that feels like a pretty fundamental thing to start to unlock. And the more switched on organizations are starting to like deal with that, but it's a journey.
Thank you. Any more questions from anyone? Go on here. Ooh, just bear with me 1 second. Can someone pass that along, please?
You said one of the challenges or problems is about, or a quote is, give developers some variety. I often hear that from developers. How can we keep people engaged and interested, I guess, is the real challenge there.
Great question.
What can we use?
Yeah. That's a talk in itself, but I'll say two things. One is if you peel back the layers on some kind of software delivery approaches, not naming any names, but if you peel back the layers on some of them, right at the heart of it is an assumption that the purpose of software development is to keep developers interested. That's a really, really opinionated take on some of these software delivery approaches, but that's what's really going on. Once you put those lenses on, you can't not see that when people from certain approaches are talking about it. It's all about what's going to keep me interested. I need the option to, I've finished work on this thing here. Oh, what else is available for me to work on? I'll go and work on this thing. That's pretty cool. And what about, some places even have like a marketplace. They'll post different options for working on different projects, and then developers can just switch whenever they feel like it. There's no sense of continuity because there isn't a sense in which this thing needs ongoing evolution and kind of care and so on and so on. If that kind of marketplace approach is fine if you're doing something which is genuinely has no longevity beyond today, like cleaning up after this conference. You could swarm on that task perfectly fine because there's really no ongoing need to like think about how we clean up this space after the conference. I hope you're not going to be back in here like tomorrow and the day after, right? Cleaning up for the next people. Like it really is time bound. In which case that's fine. But when we actually do need ongoing care for these services, then let's try and make sure that the variety comes from a different place. So we've got communities and communities of practice and guilds and things, ways to learn. Sensible approaches to like dynamic reteaming, where people can spend whatever it is 18 months in one team, and then in a mindful way or kind of an appropriate way, shift into a different area, but not just chop and change at whim, effectively.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. You've got 5 minutes to get to your next session. Really appreciate it. A round of applause for Matthew.
Thank you.